Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Scouse Science podcast. My name is Tom Solomon. I'm at the University of Liverpool, where I'm Professor of Neurology and the Director of the UK's Emerging Infections Research Unit. My guests today are BBC Radio 4's Fee Glover and the University of Liverpool's Professor Iain Buchan, and my friend Holly Ellis, who is a real Scouse scientist. Say hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, good to see you. Thank you very much for joining me. First of all, a little bit of housekeeping as always. We would like our audience to use the Zoom chat function to talk to us, to ask questions, to tell us what you think. And also our Facebook audience, which runs in the thousands, to send messages in via Facebook, and we will talk about them. And to check that it's working, we'd like you to do a little test now. So please say hello via your chat function. Tell us where you're listening from, whether you are a first-time listener or a repeat offender. And then we always like to have a question. And I think today's question, the stage 4 of the roadmap has been pushed back, which of course is really bad news, but hopefully that will be the last pushback and we will be opening on July the 19th. So tell us what you're looking forward to doing on July the 19th that you can't do at the moment. Please send those messages in. Maybe I should start there. Holly, what are you looking forward to doing on July the 19th that you can't do at the moment?
Well, hopefully I'm going to be getting married. So our wedding is booked for the 23rd of July. As you know, we had a COVID wedding last year with only 20 people, but the big wedding is booked for the 23rd of July. So fingers crossed we can have a normal wedding, but we're not going to know until about 4 days beforehand. So we'll have to wait and see.
Iain, will it be fine?
We're hoping so. We're hoping so. All being well.
We'll hope it'll be fine. Iain, are you looking forward to doing anything in particular on July?
I'm looking forward to getting out on my bike and going to a country pub for a meal with my other half without having to book a table.
Nice. Spontaneity. And Fee, are you looking forward to anything in particular on July the 19th?
I think, nothing can top Holly's answer, can it? I am just looking forward to not having to do that kind of double take on whether or not I can do something. So just to be able to leave the house and go and do things without thinking, should I, can I, can't I, will I, won't I, all of that. That's what I'm looking forward to.
It's the spontaneity, isn't it? And the rules are confusing and things change and chop a little bit. And you do always feel slightly uncertain at the moment. We're running our course, we're running our neurological infectious disease course in July, and we do that. We've done it every year for many years. We couldn't do it last year, we had to do it virtual. This year we're trying to do it in person, and we think we can do it, but even people who should know better have been questioning and saying, oh, are you sure you're allowed to go ahead with this? And we are, but you know, we had to second guess ourselves and check the rules again. Let's see what the audience are up to. Mike from Manchester is really enjoying these sessions. Okay, thank you, Mike, but tell us, what will you enjoy once you can once Freedom Day? I don't really like Freedom Day. Do you like calling it Freedom Day? Doesn't sound right to me. No. Feels very American to me.
Oh gosh.
Or sort of.
That, Tom.
I don't know. Let's see who else has been in touch. Roger Phillips says, congratulations, Holly. Have a great day. Excellent. Oh, everybody's congratulating you, Holly. Well, of course.
Thank you, everyone. Let's hope. Let's hope it goes ahead. I'll keep you updated on the next one.
Auntie Judy's got in early. She and her friend Joyce Brooks congratulate you, and they also want to know how long before booster jabs will be necessary. We'll come back to that. I'm going to park that one, but let's not forget it. Booster jabs. We will certainly come back to booster jabs. And Jenny Morris is there, Auntie Judy's sister, who is also my mother, but clearly not as important as being Auntie Judy's sister. Anyway, let's thank you very much, everyone. Keep sending the messages in. This is, of course, our 12th Scouse Science podcast, so it's our birthday, first birthday. And if you've missed any of the previous ones, do go and catch up wherever you look for your podcasts. We've had Jonathan Friedland from The Guardian, Graham Medley from Sage, Jan Ravens, all sorts of people. And whilst you're there, please rate, review, and subscribe if you know what those words mean. And if you don't, please ask somebody to help you. So, Fee, let me introduce you properly. You started in radio about 25 years ago. Before that, you were at the University of Kent at Canterbury, where you told me you did humanities, classical civilization. studying the universal truths of life. And we wondered whether you've continued to explore the universal truths of life through your radio work, which has included almost everything. I think you've been on almost every program on Radio 4 there is, and you've done some television work. But I first came across you on Saturday Live, which I really loved and still love. And I was lucky enough to be on a couple of years ago. You were voted the 9th most powerful voice on radio in 2010. And most recently, you've been doing the Listening Project with, Listening Project, and then fortunately with Jane Garvey. And fortunately, has had an amazing 20 million downloads. Now, we're not quite at 20 million on this podcast. So tell us, what's the secret?
Okay, well, and the bad news is I think the secret is you have to be 2 middle-aged women, Tom. That means, you know, that's our USP. There's no reason why anybody who is watching this should know about Fortunately. Actually, that's the weird thing about podcasts, isn't it? They can pass you by but still have these extraordinary audiences. And it is just me and Jane Garvey, and we sit down, we have a chat every week, we have a guest every week, and we talk about what's going on in the world and in our very small worlds. And there's not more to it than that. But yeah, it does seem to have ticked some boxes. And I think, actually, not to deride it, I think 2 women having a chat has not been heard enough in the world of audio. So I think if there's any secret to our success, it is simply that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you think, but two men having a chat, you know, that there's lots of that going on radio anyway already. And you know, because I was trying to think, what would the equivalent be of 2 blokes chatting? But maybe there has been.
Yeah, I mean, I think 2 blokes chatting has been, ubiquitous, hasn't it? And I think women often in audio have felt that we need to talk like men talk. And actually, I think women, when left to our own devices, the way that we talk is just slightly different.
Yeah.
I will prove this point by my rambling cul-de-sacs and tends in gentle thinking. And that's just what people like to do. And so it's turned out that's what people like to hear.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because I'm looking at Iain with his bookcase behind him, and
very neat, isn't
which
it?
looks great. It's very neat. And the reason I mention that is because I was catching up on Fee on your Fortunately podcast from not the one you've just done, but the week before, and you had Alistair Campbell as the guest. And what was so interesting was you and Jane had been chatting like you do. It's just a normal conversation, and then Alistair came on. And he said, I think he was peering at the screen like this, and he said, he always tries to see what books people have in the background. And I think one of you said to him, well, what books do you have? And he said, well, of course, I've got my 17 books I published myself. And you said, what an alpha male answer. And then nature of the conversation changed. I mean, perhaps men and women do talk differently. What do you think, Iain? Do you have any particular favourite podcasts, and do you notice men and women talking differently in podcasts?
To be honest with you, I get carried away with the conversation, and I forget someone's gender. I love the listening program. I think it's wonderfully natural, and that draws me into just the joy of exchange, of discovering connections with strangers.
Yeah.
As if you overheard that conversation at the bus stop and then someone invited you in, you'd just be drawn into the story. And there's always something around the corner to discover. I love sitting in coffee shops. Actually, even when I get stuck on a scientific paper, I'd quite like to go to a coffee shop and hack away at it. And just the connection with other people frees me up.
You can listen into what's going on. So the Listening Project that's a kind of, I think it is still on running, isn't it? And it's about people having conversations about particular things, and basically, just like you've said, just listening into the conversation, just dropping in.
So I think we've got about 4,000 conversations now stored in this sound archive at the British Library. And the whole point of doing it actually is to record what's important to us in conversation. So it's the only oral history project of its kind in the English speaking world, because it's not editorialized. So we haven't gone into it saying we are trying to find out these things about your life. We've literally said, you come to us and tell us what you feel. is the most important experience, or just something that has mattered to you along the way. So of course, every conversation is completely different. And I agree, and I love what you've just said there, just about how listening to other people can free up your own mind. And that's exactly, I think, what our conversations can do sometimes. And also because it's very generous of people to let all of us eavesdrop with their permission, essentially, in the listening project.
I'm so in some ways, Iain, I'm surprised you have time to listen to any podcast at all. Let me just introduce you a little bit more. So Iain studied medicine in Liverpool initially, and alongside studying medicine, you taught yourself statistics and software engineering. And then when you trained in public health, that's where you were really able to get into health informatics. You spent some time at Cambridge, then back at Manchester, and then came back to Liverpool in 2018, where you're now the Executive Dean of the Institute of Population Health. But I think the work you're particularly known for during the pandemic, you've been called the party professor because you were a key part of these projects that got allowed us to open up events again, festivals, and see whether you could do the festivals safely, and whether we would be able to, whether it was all going to work. And I think you showed that it could work. It is possible.
Yes. If all of the people that need to put a safety net around events, that's the event organisers, the public health teams, and the audiences, if everyone takes part in doing their bit, we invited people for tests, we asked them to not go if they had symptoms. So there are things only an audience can do. There's very close work. So the public health team treated every event as a potential outbreak, and even started outbreak prevention and control measures before the doors opened. So there's wonderful work. Team Liverpool has actually been a privilege to work in throughout the pandemic, really close working across local government, NHS, local communities. It was all about partnership, and it went really well on that bank holiday weekend. Hard work, but it delivered.
Do you think that's going to mean that even so? I think after July the 19th, the sort of social individual restrictions are hopefully going to be lifted in terms of you can just go to the pub. But I don't think big events are just suddenly going to be right. We're back at big events like we were 2 years ago. Do you think large events will follow the things you've learned during these events in Liverpool?
Well, Liverpool has a particularly advanced data infrastructure in place. So we were able to have a command and control centre to coordinate the actions of those agencies. Those facilities need to be put in place elsewhere. Caution needs to be placed against the current Delta variant. So with a duly cautious approach, I think reopening to full capacity, we know how to put the safety nets in place. But as I said, it's quite hard work, and everywhere has to be ready for that. But we need to do it.
Is that happening, do you think? So come after July the 19th, are big events just going to be able to happen, one, like they did previously, or two, with all these measures that you've introduced in Liverpool? Will they be in a position to do that? Or will there still be events that can't go ahead because they just haven't got their act together in terms of those measures?
There will be further announcements. It's not for me to prejudge policymakers, but to really put the scientific evidence of what could be done. And I think the best possible outcomes and contingencies were shown in the Liverpool pilots, but partial reopening is there. To full capacity is for policymakers to decide.
You're being terribly diplomatic there, which people, my friends and academics only talk like that when they know things they're not meant to say. So do you not want to give an opinion on this then? Do you want to just let us wait and see? That is fair enough if that's the answer. Or what would you do? What would you do? Would you say, later in the year, we've got big events. Let's say Glastonbury was going to be put off until August or September. Would you say, no, you can only do it if you can test people beforehand and monitor them and see, or would you just say, go for it?
The situation's changing all the time. The vaccination rates, the evidence that we have about participation in testing, how to respond very quickly by having linked ticket and test results. So we are getting into a better position to be able to open up those big full capacity events, but it clearly depends on the prevailing virus environment. I'm struck by the feeling. It was. I'm a data guy, but what I experienced in those pilots was intense feeling. The outbreak of joy at the Sefton Music Festival in particular was outstanding. I've never seen so many people cry at the same time. And it really reminded me of that, the core public health principle that health isn't merely the absence of disease or infirmity, but it's a complete state of mental, physical, and social well-being. And those principles are put together in a post-war reflection, a 1947 founding of the World Health Organization, and then reaffirmed in '78. These are reflections people make when they've had a really tough time, like a world war, and we've had a pandemic. And social is really, really important.
And you were at the events. I mean, so it was very emotional for people. Were you emotional yourself? Did you feel that vibe?
Yeah. It was very, very moved. I was there with two GP colleagues who are in their late 50s, and they were crying as well.
Everybody was.
It's one of the most moving experiences of their lives.
Yeah. They looked at it watching on the telly, and so these were teenagers and young adults. The event, in the end, it all turned out safely. There was no big outbreak.
No.
Fee, you've got teenage kids. How would you feel about an event like that now? If something was happening in London, would you send them?
It's such an interesting one, isn't it? Because the thing that I picked up in what you just said, Iain, was just that little phrase about asking people not to come to something if they have symptoms. And I think that's what becomes so troubling when you're trying to assess risk, is relying on somebody else's judgment about the risk they're taking into an event. And obviously, when you're parenting, you're trying to soak up all of that information to make the best choice for your teenager, who inevitably is assessing it in a different way. So I'm just very struck by how much you have to rely on people when collecting this data. I mean, could you possibly know how many people entered those arenas that you were testing who hadn't obeyed those rules? You can't kind of process that at all, can you?
You can ask people questions, and you can do tests that infer how much virus transmission was. That was a key question. Could we put a potential outbreak control situation in place? Did we see any big outbreaks? Well, there was a low virus level at the time, so it was unlikely that there would be a big outbreak. But there are important questions of how would people feel about getting tested as close to the event as possible. How many people would say, no, I'm not coming, I do have symptoms? We found some really interesting situations. Some people, a couple of people did experience symptoms, didn't quite know whether they were the symptoms that they had to take note of and not go. And now symptoms are more general that are indicative of COVID. So anyone who felt slightly unwell, we didn't want them to go. But some people were thinking only the classical COVID symptoms that they'd learned about before. So the communication is absolutely vital. Symptoms are Mother Nature's test. No test is perfect, but with multiple measures in place, testing, symptoms, but more importantly, a large proportion of those audiences been vaccinated, then you reach a point where the risk-benefit calculation has to be made. The need of society to connect in that way has to be taken into account, whilst having a reasonable level of risk of COVID transmission. There were 12 cases over 13,000.
Oh, okay. So that's an amazing statistic. And as a parent, I'd find that very reassuring. But I think also I would know that if you surveyed 10,000 people standing in a field, the first event they've been able to go to in the last 15 months, having an absolute whale of a time, the likelihood that slightly sways their answer as to whether or not they're feeling a bit hot and clammy or have had a cough. You know exactly what I mean. I'm not suggesting that everybody would lie, but I'm kind of suggesting that maybe the parameters are different. And you know, it's just hard to work that out, isn't it? Especially if you're trying to work it out on behalf of your kids.
So would you have sent them, Fee? Would you have let yours go, or
no? Because they wouldn't want to. They're at home doing Latin primers most of the time, Tom. No, I think I would have. Yes, I think I would have, and just sucked up the anxiety and trusted that people like Iain have everybody's best interests at heart. So
yeah. We'll let in a minute. I'll ask Holly to join us and tell us what's happening in the chatosphere. But I mean, well, you know, as parents all the time, that's what we're doing, isn't it? Your job as a parent is to worry about what your kids are doing, and I guess this is one particular dimension of that. The other thing we'll come to in a minute, Iain, is so the other big thing we did in Liverpool was was this mass testing to see whether that would work earlier on, and I know that there's some controversy around that and issues of trust around that. But let's just, Holly, do join us and tell us what's been happening out there.
Hi everyone. So yeah, there's lots of comments coming in, people telling us what they're looking forward to on the 19th of July. So Mike on Zoom says he's looking forward to sports events and going without any issues, and especially to watch Everton. And then there's lots of other people looking forward to someone, Jen Taylor on Facebook's just looking forward to spontaneity, kind of like what Fee was saying, and I guess just being able to do things without planning in advance. There's people watching from all over. We've got Raoul from Facebook watching from Chile, and Quincy Lou from Berlin as well. So we've got a global audience once again. Now, I think we better answer the question from Auntie Judy and her friend Joyce Brooks, otherwise we're going to get into trouble. So they want to know how long before booster jabs will be necessary, and both of them had their jabs in December and January.
I can give an answer, but Iain, do you have a feeling? It's not, I guess, directly the stuff you've been doing. But what's your thoughts about booster jabs?
I'm encouraged by the emerging evidence that immunity is deeper and likely to last longer than we previously thought. But Tom, perhaps you're more specific on the when.
Yeah, I think the when. I think we will need booster jabs for the elderly and and people who have other illnesses, and I think we're likely to start that before this winter. And I think potentially the jabs will be for slightly different viruses. You know, we've seen these range of variants, some of which are you know, more, each time we get a new variant, it's more likely to transmit, and also. Although the vaccines do give protection, so for the Delta, for the Kent variant, for example, 1 dose of vaccine gave good protection. For the Delta, the latest one that came from India, you really need 2 doses of vaccine for good protection. So, and people talk a lot about strains that are resistant to the vaccine. I don't think it's not going to be an all or nothing thing. It's going to be a gradual shift, and so I suspect we will need boosters before the end of the year. We will start using them, and they will be with viruses or vaccines that are slightly different. I think the point is you can't wait. Nobody's going to wait and say, well, let's sit tight and just see what happens. You know, if we have vaccines available and immunity is reducing in people who've been vaccinated early in the year, then we should be giving them. Fee, I know you had questions when we chatted the other day. You had some scientific questions you wanted to put to us, and we must make sure you get the chance to, because you are the voice of the people. So if there's any other particular things you want to know, you know, do jump in.
Well, I really, really want to ask some questions about the variants. I mean, is it possible with such a new virus to already know how many variants to expect in the future? Does that ever add up in terms of previous information informing future speculation?
Well, I mean, that's a devil of a question, really. But viruses always change over time, and they evolve, and they evolve to respond so that they want to survive and propagate. So a virus that spreads more easily, like the Delta, is going to spread more quickly than the original variants, and therefore it's going to fill more of the population. And coronaviruses, this is a coronavirus, so we do know about other coronaviruses, and they do change over time. But the thing that limits the amount that the speed at which they can change, is the number of infections. So if we had managed to vaccinate the whole population and there was hardly any virus circulating, then it doesn't get the chance to change. Whereas compare that with in India, where there's been this explosion of virus spread, the more the viruses replicate, the more chance they have to change. So that's why it's going to be so important, not just to vaccinate the UK, but to vaccinate the whole world, because we will be, however well protected we are in the UK, we'll be vulnerable to what's happening elsewhere.
Sorry, that noise, by the way, is my dog. I don't have some.
Oh, let's see your dog. We like.
Oh gosh! So you want to see the dog?
Yeah.
So just having a sleep on the floor at the moment. Hang on a sec. There's quite a lot of her when you do get to see her. She's a massive ex-rescue racing greyhound. You might be able to.
Oh, there we are. Yes.
Lying down there. She's
Iain,
asleep for most of the day.
That big furry thing in front of you is not a cat, is it? That's your microphone.
That's my microphone. Yeah.
Iain,
can I just ask one follow-up question
Yeah.
on that, though? So, can you learn more, though, about these new variants? Did the dog went? Can you learn so much about the new variants that you can, at some stage, predict how a mutation will occur and therefore protect a population before it needs protecting?
Do you want me to take that in? Do you want to take it? Iain, I normally say in the warm-up, in the preamble, when we chat before that, and I forgot, so apologies, I'll do it now. If you want to answer, it's Zoom etiquette. If you want to say something, jump in, lean forward, raise your hand, and that's kind of the
You
way.
can cover the convergent evolution thing, Tom.
Oh, yeah. Again, it's another tricky question. So can you predict and then vaccinate in advance of what you predict? I think the answer to that, the straightforward answer is no. I mean, we've had flu, we've had vaccines for flu for many, many years, and the way we change the flu vaccine is by looking at what's happened around the world. We usually look in Australia first, because they tend to get their flu season before us, and then we try and there's a bit of prediction, but it's based on what we're seeing. So I don't think anyone would take the whole, right at the start of taking the whole genome of this virus, the complete genetic material, and looked and said, oh, that's where the change will happen. But once we started getting information about where the body's antibodies attack, which bit of the virus, so if that's the virus spike protein, and antibodies stick onto little bits of it, and the bits that the antibodies stick on, that therefore drives the evolution, that therefore drives the virus to say, okay, I need to change that bit, because that's where the human antibodies are attacking me and killing me. So in a sense, the virus evolves in response to what we do, rather than the other way around.
Thank you.
That was a tough question. Shall we move on? It's supposed to be a light afternoon for me.
Sorry.
Let's see, Holly, are there any other burning questions from?
Yeah, so there's a good one on Zoom from Eileen Mark, who's asking about giving jabs to under 18. So she said that children in Liverpool are continually being sent home from school right now, when over 30 million people have had the vaccines and their education is being disrupted. So are there any plans to give jabs to under 18s, and what's your view on this?
I'll start, Iain. I'll start with your view on vaccinating kids in terms of public health policy, and then maybe we'll get Fiona's thoughts in respect of her kids.
It's, as you said earlier, Tom, we need to reduce transmission as much as possible, and there is open questions among children about the amount of spread that there has been already, and the background natural immunity. We see high levels of transmission at the moment of Delta variant amongst children. There are lots of open questions around the value of testing, etc., that's flying around in the media at the moment. But bottom line is, the larger proportion of society that are vaccinated sooner, the better. That will be in a biological and a behavioural and a social sense. So those programs must push ahead. And vaccination, we've got buses out in Liverpool at the moment. It's not evenly spread. Public health teams around the country look at where their needs are greatest, and sadly they're often in our most deprived communities. The uptake hasn't been as high in some of those communities, and you have to try different ways of engaging.
So just explain the buses, the role of the buses is?
To take the vaccines out to people rather than people come to the vaccines.
Yeah.
To put the messages about the benefits of vaccination in ways that local communities come up with and say, yes, come in. They speak door to door knocking, street to street communication, using faith groups. This is good, solid public health practice. And there is no magic formula for it. It's about being close to your local communities. So we're back to partnership. Yes, vaccination top priority, and the partnerships required to get everyone to understand it's important for them, their family, and their community.
Fee, what are your thoughts on vaccinating kids?
So I'm all in favour of it. I mean, I've not been opposed to any vaccinations for my kids at all, and I've struggled with understanding people's logic who haven't vaccinated their kids. So that's just, me laying out my table there. I suppose the thing that I do slightly wonder about, and you'll be able to answer this immediately, both of you, with your clever heads on, is why you would give the same amount of vaccination to a smaller human being than a larger human being, and whether there is anything in the history of vaccination that suggests that some vaccines can harm children more than they might harm adults. I mean, why would you give the same amount of something to a 33 kilogram human as you would to a 66 kilogram weight of human? Is that a daft question?
I think it's a good question. Iain, do you want to have a go, or should I have a go?
Go on, you fire away with this, Tom.
I don't think it's a daft question at all, because of course other medicines you'd give kids reduced volumes if it's paracetamol, but the difference is effectively a vaccine, you're giving somebody a tiny bit of the infection, or you're not giving them the whole virus, which would make them sick, but you're taking the spike protein of the virus and giving them that, so they then make an immune response against it. And whether you're a child or an adult, if you get the natural infection, you're going to get a dose of virus, as it were. It's not as if kids get less virus when they're sick to adults. So therefore, in the same way, when you're giving a vaccine, you're going to give them an equivalent to what they would get if they got infected, because you want them to develop a full immune response against it. Having said that, one thing that I think is being tried for kids is the intranasal vaccine, and that's just because it's easier to give the kids than the adults. Iain, do you want to add anything to that?
It's not the same as a dose of a drug, Faye, where the dose of the drug might have a proportionate response. There's a threshold effect. You have to have enough of what looks like foreign, the virus, that you need the body to mount a reaction against and have a memory of how do you react to that in future? How do you build up that protection? So some of the dose is coming from the body and not from the vaccine that you give. So you have to give enough, but it's about the body's response to that. And of course, timing of doses of vaccine are really important for that.
Okay, I'm going to let Holly go, and she'll keep an eye on what's happening in the chatosphere, and we're going to move on and talk about this issue of trust and public trust in science, or trust more broadly. And I think so Iain, you were involved again in Liverpool, these mass testing, where I think the idea was to see, could we, by testing the whole population, not just those who felt sick, would this help us identify people who had the virus and didn't know about it, and therefore bring things under control quicker? But it became controversial, and I think there were some people who were strongly opposed to what was happening. Just tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, there was a lot of distrust at the time of testing being imposed. So Liverpool, we put our hand up and said, we want to put the message to our local communities in our own way from our public health team. So the strapline, let's all get tested, went with local voices to local communities. From the 6th of November, for a month, that message went out. A quarter of the population came forward. It was get tested if you live or work in the city of Liverpool, whether you have symptoms or not. Use a different service if you've got symptoms, but if you haven't, here's a new service. You can get tested whenever you like. And a quarter of the population came through. There'll be a report published next week, which is our full report, an interim report we published in December. I think the new bit that people will see is the actual impact that we measured was that there was a fifth reduction in the cases. Mm-hmm. So this did have an impact on reducing transmission. And there was a fifth increase in the cases detected. So the ability to know where the virus was. And if you know where the virus is, you can move faster with your control measures. But if you move faster with communities, it's a partnership. Of course, it was difficult for some people to respond.
Where was the trouble? What was happening? What were people saying?
The distrust was not understanding the nature of the testing. So there was some miscommunication really about the nature of the test. Now, it is really complex. I found the misunderstanding even amongst scientific colleagues, and it's really complicated, as you've got a virus that you're testing for bits on the virus, the antigen. You've got another type of test which looks for bits of genetic material from inside the virus that can lie around for a long time after your body's dealt with it and you're no longer infectious. But the point of mass testing was to find people who were infectious, give them the chance to isolate, stop the spread of the virus. So you didn't want a clinical test of have they been infected. You want a test of are they infectious? And those tests are positive at different times. So there's a curve that moves through the body of the amount of virus you've got. First of all, it brews for a while, then it goes up very quickly. And then there's a slower tail off. So it's not symmetrical. So you've got PCR tests are positive for quite a long time after you're not infectious. And then you've got these lateral flow tests that are going to be positive more often when someone's actually putting out a lot of virus from their nose and from their throat. And that's what you're trying to pick up. But it was measured in a way that it looked like the clinical test, the PCR test, was the gold standard. It's not, it's a reference standard. And you're not going to have 100% sensitivity for that. So it's a really complex. You can understand why people are confused.
And I think it's not been helped by the fact that very early on in the pandemic, ministers, but also some scientists started calling the PCR test an antigen test. Do you remember that? It was like, it's bizarre. Why would they call it that? And it didn't help. But I mean, complicated issue at the best of times. But trust and the public trust in scientists has been critical in the pandemic and in terms of bringing it under control. Do you feel, Jane? Fee, do you feel that has gone up during the course of the pandemic or down? What do you think people's responses are in terms of understanding the science and trusting?
It has just been so difficult, hasn't it, to go from a standing start to a high level of understanding epidemiology and therefore being able to work out what might be a political judgment or motivated by big pharma judgment or whatever it is. I just think it's been so hard for everybody. There isn't one place in the country or the world where I think people can hand on heart say that's where we go when we want to just trust somebody. Different countries have had different reactions to different political parties. We're all over the shop, aren't we? So we're left to our own devices. And that means it's almost up to you to do the work to enhance your own level of trust. I've been bewildered throughout every stage of the pandemic as to what the best thing just for me and my family is. And I'm not the kind of person who has led a life where I have had to mistrust the system. So I'm aware that I'm in a privileged position and I'm still not entirely convinced by what's said. So, I think it's a really, really important shift in our world to understand. And I actually really feel for you two as scientists, because it seems to me, and I might be very wrong, but it seems to me that you have to get to us, the public, through a gauze of mistrust now, not an assumption of trust. And that must make your jobs very hard. But perhaps you don't feel that. Perhaps it's only something that is felt on City Street.
You feel it when you get death threats. That's interesting. But that's the first time in my career I've had a few death threats. Yeah, okay, Easter Saturday was interesting. Suddenly the comms line got mixed up.
You're selling a mistruth, so people are threatening you.
No, this was about vaccine. The most recent one was a misconception that events testing was going to be about vaccine passports and some imposition via the back door. And that's not what had been planned at all. But the comms that had got in the way there left me in the front line as a scientist running an experiment that wasn't going to use a vaccine passport at all. In fact, it was going to ask people, how do you feel about declaring your vaccination status? And would you feel comfortable about being asked about that? Perhaps you would feel very comfortable if you didn't have to have a test. I mean, these are the things we were going to ask in the program. We had to cancel the first event because there were death threats to me and the organisers. And to be honest with you, they worry me less than deadlines, but it's become a very strange 16 months on call with these things to deal with that you previously hadn't as a scientist, a public health position as I am.
I think it's, yeah, I mean, so I've had more abusive emails, and other messages than normal recently. But I mean, I think people are incredibly fed up. If we take the most recent pushback of the dates, people are incredibly fed up about that. And I guess they feel, I don't quite know what, you try and, if you ignore the extremely rude words in some of the messages and try and look and try and think what, try and understand it. Okay, forget all the swear words, that's fine, that's just passion. But what are they not understanding? And just to give an example, the most recent one, which was particularly offensive, but in fact, what they were saying was, why do you, it was not an unreasonable question. 80% of people have some antibody levels now, as shown by testing, approximately 80%. So why are we having to extend the lockdown for 4 weeks? That was the kind of essence of it. And, the answers are quite subtle and the science is a bit complicated, but, just having antibodies that can be detected doesn't mean you are protected completely against the virus. And then also, actually, whatever the studies tell you about how many people have got antibodies, what we're looking at is data about how many people are going into hospital and how quickly those rates are going up. And that's really the thing that's driven the delay in this in stage 4. But I kind of do, I've got sympathy for people. It's as you said, Fee, people have got information coming from all sorts of different directions. They're going from a standing start of knowing nothing at all to try and understand complicated issues. So they either, as you say, trust completely the scientists, although then there'll be scientists saying different things. There's been a group called Anti-SAGE, or whatever they're called, who say things in opposition to SAGE. And then, and we're in a space where people don't know. I've looked back at some of my earlier BBC Breakfast recordings, and absolutely everything I said has been proven wrong. So I've sort of tried to stop making predictions because they're based on knowledge at the time. At the start, we thought this is what we know about these kind of viruses. So
we're not talking about integrity as well as trust here, Tom. I always find it comforting to work with local public health teams who are gathering the feedback from their communities on the ground, and they have to make some tough choices. I feel as a public health physician and a scientist, I'm a public servant to provide the evidence that's needed. If it's become politicized, like for me, a lateral flow device, which is lateral flow testing, became very politicized. Are you for it or against it? But that's the wrong position. When is it appropriate to use that test alongside others with other public health measures? And that's the reality for public health teams on the ground. Tests, technologies, they're only as good as the other measures that they're knitted into. And the integrity is to provide the evidence that's needed to make a decision at the front line. And in a pandemic position, those decisions have taken on a whole new dimension. We're working at a pace that many of us have never experienced before. And our duty to act with integrity is to provide a good enough answer in a timely manner and not be a selfish scientist and brew a perfect answer that comes too late to be useful to society.
And a good enough answer in a timely manner may actually mean that in a few weeks' time we've learned more and now things are different. And what we said, 2 months ago, we know more now, and so we're saying something different. And I guess that's been the challenge. What would have made things easier for you, Fee? You talked about all these different sources of information, trying to make sense of things yourself. What could have been done, or what could one do in the future?
God, I mean, what a good question that is. I don't have a succinct answer to that, actually. I mean, it's the biggest thing that I've lived through in my lifetime. And I think because we're not completely at the end of it yet, I think it's too soon to kind of, learn those individual lessons. I mean, I think I have trusted the scientists. I love what you've said, Tom, about, going back to look at the earlier things that you said and just accepting that they've now proved to be wrong. How wonderful to hear somebody actually just say that, because that's what your work is all about, isn't it? You take facts, you put them through the mill of experience, and you work out what it is at the other end of it. You didn't know it at the beginning. So I suppose more of that, actually, more of people just being able to say, we've tried this, it's not working, come with us onto the next thing, really. But it is too soon, isn't it? The objects in the rearview mirror
it is,
not yet in focus, so it's hard to know.
I think so. I think, it feels to me like, so much has happened. It's going to, once the dust settles, if it ever does, then there's going to be quite a lot of thinking back and revisiting and re-experiencing. Let me get Holly in because we are over time. Holly's going to join us just to tell us if there's been anything else on the chat.
Hi, Tom. Yeah, so there's a few comments. Sam on Zoom is saying that the trust in lateral flow test is too high because people think if you get the test and then you test negative, then you haven't got it. And I guess really the worry with that is that people will then start taking risks that they probably wouldn't have taken otherwise because they think that they have not got the virus. I don't know whether anyone wants to comment on that.
Yeah, sure. And it's a really valid point. That's the partnership again. The test is to add another layer of protection. It's not a green pass. It won't be catching it might catch maybe 8 out of 10 people who are likely to pass on the virus. We don't know precisely yet. It's a tool to add safety. It's not a license.
But it's really hard
to do whatever you like.
That's the thing. It's really hard for people to understand that unless it's presented. It's so hard in the heat of everything else to present this concept. People talk about them as being like pregnancy tests. Well, I don't know. My wife's been pregnant a couple of times, but on both occasions, I think when the test said she was pregnant, we ended up with a baby. In terms of lateral flow, remember everybody compared it. Oh, it's just like a pregnancy test, but it's not, because it's not giving you a complete answer. I don't even know if the kit, Iain, when you get the kit, I mean, our kit at home, thinking about it, we get the box, we've got all of this. Nowhere does it say really clearly, loud and clear, this test is only going to tell you so much. You should interpret it with caution, etc., etc.
And 2 tests in a week is different to just taking a one-off test. If you get better at doing the swab in your nose and your throat, that improves performance. Swabbing quality will affect PCR tests as well. So there are all these it's end to end, and that's why the Liverpool pilot was really important, because it looked at the end to end system and not just a device in isolation from how society would use it.
Holly, any other?
There's just another comment, which was sort of linked to what Iain was saying about getting abused and things. So someone just said on Zoom that shop staff have stopped asking customers to wear masks now because they've been getting abused as well. So I guess the point is, you know, a lot of people have suffered from this, you know, not just like the scientists and things like that. There's been shop workers that have had to deal with this sort of abuse relating to COVID issues on a daily basis as well.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, go on.
So yeah, no, that was all really. People just saying the problem is that the problem is for all the mistakes they've made, our government are just following the science. So I guess that's probably something that Iain, you would certainly agree with.
It's a fusion of science and society. And a pandemic isn't just about minimizing a virus. It's about maximizing the opportunities for health and society while you do the best to minimize the virus. But it has reality when it's on the ground, when it's a whole community you can relate to. And I get back to the importance of the local public health teams who see this in the round. They see the holistic path forward, the mental, physical, and social well-being that they're responsible for, and not just minimizing a virus.
Iain, if from the start local public health teams had been used more for testing, tracking and tracing instead of farming it out to big people who, you know, organizations that had never done it before, would we have got things under control quicker?
It's a basic principle. It's a basic principle of distributed resilience. Can the battlefield still work if it's cut off from the war room? We need a networked approach to pandemic management, not a hub and spoke.
So is that a yes? I think that's a yes.
Yes, we need much more empowerment of local public health teams.
I think Iain has spent a bit too much time with politicians. I'm going to take him out to the pub, maybe on a bike to a random pub.
Yes, Minister.
Yes. All right. Anyway, on that note, thank you both very much for joining us. I have posted in the chat for everybody the links to previous podcasts so that you can catch up with them and rate, review and subscribe when you're there. I think we know the date and the guests for the next event, Holly.
Yeah, so the next one is on the 6th of July and our guests are Professor Helen Sharp from the University of Liverpool and impressionist and comedian Rory Bremner. So that should be a fun one.
Rory Bremner, ooh. Are you any good at impressions? No, okay. All right. So let me also thank the team that nobody ever sees who are there at the back of the Zoom and the meetings doing all the technical stuff. And after 3, we will all say a cheery goodbye to all our audience. 1, 2, 3. Bye.
Bye.